My name is Priscilla Bettis. I am the author of the upcoming dystopian horror novella, Dogmeat. I recommend Brian Boyer's Autumn Gothic as a favorite horror novel, and this is why. Autumn Gothic is an extreme horror story. You'll get shocked by the blood and gore on one page and receive a gut punch on the next. It'll floss the mundane right out of your brain. But it's not all fun and games. Weighty topics surface, such as the things we pass down to our children. Good things, sure, like a work ethic or a vocation, but difficult things too, such as alcoholism. Questions arise like, is there an afterlife? If so, is it peaceful? And why are some deaths so unfair? A strike from a seemingly capricious God. Boyer does something I've never seen done in a book before. He takes a road trip adventure, combines it with a Gothic novel, and throws in Lovecraftian elements. It all comes together for an unpredictable and brilliant plot. Speaking of brilliant, Boyer is an amazing musician, and he writes like he plays. His prose is like an improv guitar solo. He throws caution to the wind and he may not stay in the pocket, but he keeps the melody going, and he relies on excellent character portrayals and contemplative passages to hold the reader's attention. His prose always sounds unique. You'd think in a book with all that blood and gore and a gazillion deaths that the authorial tone would be nihilistic. But no, there's a grasp at humanity in Autumn Gothic and a sense of hope for our future. Get it? Read it. It's awesome.
Hello, I'm Brian Boyer, and I would like to thank Brad Proctor for inviting me to participate in his Horror Authors Recommend a Favorite Horror Book video. The book I'm recommending is Wormwood, a collection of short stories by Poppy Z. Bright, published in 1993. Poppy's first book, a vampire novel called Lost Souls, was published in 1992, but I didn't read it until 1997, after I found it in the book section of a huge store called Media Play in Nashville, Tennessee when I was 24 years old. The cover, the title, and Poppy's name intrigued me, so I opened the book, read the first page, and was like, this one's coming home with me. My apartment was on Nolensville Road, right down the street from Media Play. So I took the book home, read it, and was completely blown away. To this day, Lost Souls remains my favorite vampire novel. After that, however, I couldn't find Poppy's other books anywhere. In 1997, you couldn't just pull your phone out and have any book on planet Earth in the palm of your hand with a single click. Back then, as a reader, you were pretty much limited to whatever you could find in a bookstore. 2 years later, in 1999, when I was 26 and living in West Virginia once again, I found myself in one of the two bookstores at the Crossroads Mall in Beckley. There was a Bookland and a Walden Books in the mall at that time. I was in Walden Books, in the horror section, and noticed a teenage girl with black hair, black clothes, and black fingernails standing next to me. She was holding a copy of Lost Souls while perusing some other books. I told her Lost Souls is such an incredible novel. I know, she said. I keep lending it to my friends and never getting it back. I said, I wish I could find some of Poppy's other stuff. The girl shot me a look. There's a copy of Wormwood down at the other bookstore. Thank you, I said, then hurried down to the other store, where I found one copy of Wormwood, took it home, and devoured it. Not this copy, of course. I've lost count of how many copies of Wormwood I've gone through. But even had I not returned to this book numerous times over the past 23 years, there are stories in Wormwood that would still be embedded in my brain nearly a quarter of a century later. In closing, I want to read a passage from The Ash of Memory, The Dust of Desire. In the story, the narrator has a girlfriend named Leah who cheats on him with his friend Cleve. Not only that, but she finds out that she's pregnant and tells him that the baby could belong to either man. When she decides to have an abortion, he goes with her to see the doctor in some old, run-down industrial district of New Orleans. They never find that doctor, however, and instead of a clinic, They end up in an old abandoned factory. Spoilers ahead. Then the machinery kicked on. Only dimly did I see the first hook lifting Leah up and away from me, as if she had raised her arms and flown. I stood there dumbly for several minutes, unable to grasp what had happened even as her blood fell upon my face and my outstretched hands. A high-heeled shoe dropped to the floor in front of me, missing my head by an inch. I did not move. I stared up at the swirling clouds of dust, up at the figure that hung suspended like an angel in black lace. When the dust cleared, Leah was slumped over, limp, her head hanging upside down, her hair like a bright banner in the dusk of the room. The hook had punched into her back and out through the soft flesh of her abdomen, but her face was perfectly calm. I was calm too, an absolute calm like the equilibrium of particles in a solution. Should I have been frightened? Perhaps. But somehow I knew that even if I walked up to one of the machines and touched it, I would not be hurt. They did not want me. The metal of the hook was beaded with bright blood. On its sharp tip was a thick gobbet, darker than the rest and more solid looking. It looked like nothing but a piece of meat that had ceased to live or breathe or suck. I no longer thought I knew something about love. Now I knew what love was all about. I have described the scene to Cleve as well as I could and asked him to paint it for me. When he has captured it as closely as possible in the jeweled watercolor tones that he loves, we will frame it and hang it on the wall. Sometimes we talk about magic. In a city of millions, an ancient city overcrowded and mean enough, a kind of magic could evolve. Magic happens when and where it wants to. In a great, cruel, teeming city, one could create one's own magic, intentionally or otherwise. Magic to fulfill desires that should remain buried in the deepest pit of the soul, or just to get through the desperate hustle of staying alive from day to day. And out of the desperation, out of the hunger for bread or love, out of the secret, hard, bright joy at the madness of it all, out of these things something else could be born. Something made of bad dreams and lost love. Something that would use as its agent the abandoned, the forgotten, the all but useless, the love that no one wanted anymore. I go up to the roof of Cleve's building and I look out over the city, and I think about all the power waiting to emerge from its black womb, and I wonder who else will tap into this homegrown magic, and I howl into the wind and rejoice at the emptiness within me. And nowhere else on the horizon have I ever seen so many billions of lights, or so many patches of darkness. I'm Brian Bowyer. Thank you for listening to my recommendation of Wormwood by Poppy Z. Bright.
Hi there, my name is Summer Cannon and I'm a horror writer, and I hear you're looking for something spooky to read this season. So that's why I'm here. I would like to talk to you about a book called The Haunting by Ruby Jean Jensen. I've got my copy here. It's going to look backwards to you, but as you can see, this is a well-worn, well-loved, and much read book from my personal library. This is a book that holds a very special place in my heart because I am a lifelong horror fan. I've been watching scary movies since before I was old enough to even be in school. I've been reading horror books since pretty much as soon as I learned to read, I was checking out horror books. This is the first book that actually creeped me out. I feared for a while that maybe I had grown numb to some things in horror just because it's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. But this book, there have been many since, but this book was the first book to creep me out. Now, it is a haunted house tale, and I have a big love for haunted house tales personally because I think that it is one of the more diverse tropes in the horror genre. You can do all kinds of things with a haunted house story. They can be cosmic, they can be extreme, they can be quiet, they can be gothic. You can do lots with a haunted house tale. And The Haunting is maybe a little different because I read every haunted house book I can get my mitts on. Like I said, I love them. The Haunting has a little more going on with it. So we've got the big scary haunted house. It's old, it's in need of renovations. We've got the spirit making creepy appearances throughout. But we've also got monsters in the basement. We've got something boiling away in the stew pot maybe you don't want to know about. And we've got a creepy doll. Now, that sounds like it might be too much. That sounds like we have stuffed this story with too many creepy things. However, under the expertise of such a great writer like Ruby Jean Jensen, I can tell you that this book is surprisingly lean for all of the little trinkets we've got going on in there. It is a surprisingly lean and effective haunted house tale. I cannot recommend it enough. Again, creeped me out. First book to really creep me out. It continues to creep me out to this day. I recently read it, maybe 2 years ago was the last time I went through it. Cannot recommend it enough. The Haunting by Ruby Jean Jensen. Get you through the spooky season. Bye!
Hey everybody, my name is Clay McLeod Chapman, and I've been given the honor, the privilege to talk about a book that has left a little bit of an impact on me these last few months. And the book that I selected for Halloween reading is Daniel Krause's The Ghost That Ate Us. I don't know if you are fans of true crime and haunted houses and poltergeists and fast food, and if any of these things are of your liking, I really genuinely believe that you will like this book. Daniel writes with such a density and a seriousness that I find kind of refreshingly serious. You would imagine a book like this, which is all in effect about a haunted fast food restaurant, a haunted McDonald's, for to be crass. It's not a McDonald's though. It's its own place. Excuse me. What is kind of phenomenal about it is that there is no winking, there is no elbow in your ribs. Daniel plays it very, very seriously, and I'm was kind of agog at how straight-laced he was throughout the course of this, where in the hands of any other writer, the tongue would be so firmly planted in the cheek, it would just poke right through. And I say this in all sincerity, this book made me unable to eat a hamburger for well over several weeks after reading it, which is a testament, I think, to the writing and the power of it. It feels as if it is a documentation of an actual event, an actual crime, an actual haunting that takes place in the Midwest. And I feel like it's lingered with me to such an extent that it seriously made me reevaluate my own kind of dietary intake. So yeah, I mean, honestly guys, it's really spooky, but more than that, it kind of seeps into your system. It just goes there and embeds, and it feels oily. There's like a little certain kind of like viscosity to it, like baking grease or frying oil. I can't recommend this enough. Daniel Krause's The Ghost That Ate Us. Thank you, guys.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Clark, and Brad Proctor asked me to make a movie about a favorite horror book of mine and why I would recommend it to you. And what I did was I picked a book that surprised me the most. There's a ton of I could have picked from. I'm still working my way around the horror community, trying to read at least one from everybody. I've got a ways to go. But one that surprised me, as I said, is Until Summer Comes Around by Glenn Rolfe. Why does it surprise me? I wasn't excited to read it because it's about vampires, and vampires are not my thing. Some people don't like ghosts or serial killers or demons, and vampires aren't really my thing, but this happened to come out, and I was like, all right, let's do it. It also doesn't really look like a horror book, and neither does the title doesn't sound like a horror book, except for down here it says Love, Loss, Betrayal, and the Undead. So I was, low expectations going into it. And then as I got going, Glenn's style is very readable. I was sucked right in. And I liked it so much that I went out and I bought his next book, August Size. I haven't read this one yet, but I'm looking forward to it. As I said, I'm still trying to get through a stack over there across the room. Let's see. Another thing about this book that I liked is it takes place in Old Orchard Beach, Maine in 1986. And as you can tell, I was around in 1986. And I also lived in southern New Hampshire and had a girlfriend in southern Maine. So the area is very familiar to me. He mentions a Judas Priest concert at the time, and I went to that. I asked him later during a podcast, and he did not go to that. But I think I'm a little older than him. But anyway, it was up my alley that way, over and above, the readability and the story itself. One other thing, why would I recommend it to you? If you're not big into vampires either, or even if you are, these vampires are kind of like the ones in Fright Night, as opposed to gentleman vampires like in Interview with the Vampire or Dracula, that kind of thing with a suit or whatever. So they're more animalistic, they're strong, they've got, multiple fangs. It's a lot more animalistic, and that was cool too. So anyway, that's my reason for recommending this, and I look forward to meeting Glenn at the Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival in Haverhill, Massachusetts.
Hey everybody, I want to say first thank you to Brad for inviting me to contribute to this. I'm LP Hernandez. If you've heard my name recently, it's probably because that book right there, Stargazers, that came out via Cemetery Gates Media in July. It was also in the June Nightworms box. I've also been on the No Sleep podcast quite a few times, so if my name sounds familiar, that's probably where you heard it. So I'm here to talk about a book that I love, and I could have gone a few different ways with it. Somewhere up on that shelf right about there is a copy of Swan Song. That's a book that had a big effect on me as a writer. I read it when I was a teenager, and I think I was going to talk about how that has impacted or influenced my writing, but if you haven't read Swan Song, you've been living under a rock. So I thought, what about something I read this year that I enjoyed, but I don't know if I'm smart enough to talk about Sundial, even though I really did enjoy it. Another one that's got a lot of hype behind it is that one. There's going to be a movie version of that directed by M. Night Shyamalan, but I went a different direction. So I'm going to talk about The Rules of the Road by C.B. Jones, and I don't have a physical copy because I read it on my Kindle. I don't know how well this will show up, but yeah, that's pretty washed out. The Rules of the Road. It is a really cool cover. So I first became aware of this because the first story in The Rules of the Road was on the No Sleep podcast, I think last summer, and I really enjoyed that story. It was about a man who was driving kind of in an isolated road and listening to the radio gets interrupted by this interesting DJ presence, I don't know what you call him, Buck Hensley. And after some banter that feels very specific to the person that the rule will be directed at, tells them, I believe the first one is, if you see a shoe on the side of the road, and there's some instructions you have to follow, or something bad is going to happen to you. What the bad thing isn't always explained. So, although I guess this is considered a novel, it reads more like a short story collection. So this main character is someone that kind of connects all the stories. This has an effect on his life, this encounter with Buck Hensley, and so he solicits via the internet additional stories from people who've encountered Buck Hensley. So they'll come in via email, sometimes phone calls, messages sent to him of people who have encountered Buck all across the country in all these different formats. But what happens is similar, even though what specifically happens and the rule is always different, the setup is similar. The broadcast, so this progresses from radio broadcasts to interrupting a Pixies CD. One interrupts a video game where you get this broadcast of Buck Hensley, and he's very entertaining. It's probably my favorite part of the book, is just Buck's rants. They're very funny. And then you get a rule, like if you go to a gas station that has boiled peanuts, you have to have some or eat some. They're very strange and sometimes pretty harmless. But if you don't do it, then ... bad things can happen. So I wouldn't say it's a pure horror. It kind of jumps around. It touches speculative. Definitely there's some horror elements to it. There's a zombie theme. There's a ghost theme. And I would say overall, something I really love the most about this is someone who's lived all across the country, because I'm in the military. Down to very specific signs on the side of the road. There's one in particular in Alabama that I recall passing many times on the way to my mom's house. So this feels like a very American book. And so not to say if you're not American you can't enjoy it. Actually, it'll probably be entertaining for you as an outsider to get this kind of sense of what America is like, because it's authentic to... if he's writing a story about Alabama, it feels like Alabama. There's one in North Texas. I'm very familiar with that part of the country too. It felt like North Texas. And so it's very well written. It's a book that you'll want to savor. I did. It took me 2 months to read it, not because I couldn't have read it in one sitting. I could have. I definitely could have. But I enjoyed it so much that it was kind of like, having a satisfying snack. Like I was able to read a story, put it down, and then come back to it a day or two later. And I really kind of, like your favorite books, you don't want them to end. So that was absolutely one of my favorite reads of 2021, and I can't wait to see what else C.B. Jones comes out with.
Hi, I'm Rowan Hill. I'm a horror author reviewing a horror author for Brad Proctor's channel. Thank you, Brad, for having me. And today I'm going to be talking about Christina Henry's Near the Bone. First of all, it's a wonderful cover. It really appeals to me as a writer and as a traveler. I would totally try to climb that mountain, and I would try to live in that house if I could. And it very much goes with her book. So this is built as a psychological creature feature. It has Paul Tremblay's and Christopher Golden's seal of approval. Gabino Iglesias did a wonderful review of this book, and it has, I would first of all put it as 4 out of 5 stars. Christina Henry has done a wonderful job. If you like stories that create an environment, she has done a really good job encapsulating a isolated mountain, snowy, distant, hard to get to. The mountain and the creature is really kind of the third character in this novel, and it appeals to me. I've chosen this book because this is the sort of book I would love to write. I have tried to write things as wonderful as this, and I will still try to write it, but I'll plug myself later. So quick synopsis is Mattie is a woman living on a mountain, and it's pretty evident in the first chapter or 2 chapters that Mattie and her husband, who live on this mountain, are actually hostage and captor. And it's a very abusive relationship. And the conflict comes from, I think it's the first page, when an unknown creature has suddenly made itself burst into their lives. There's animal killings, there's tracks in the snow, there's a cave, grotesque cave. So that's our conflict, and it is a very satisfying creature feature. It's definitely dread inducing, and Christina Henry does a great job at building climaxes and the unknown, I would say. It's so hard to not do spoilers for this novel. I'm not gonna say anything more. I think that's probably enough. I would definitely recommend it if you like nature horror. I have read some reviews that do not like the ending, and that is fine. It's not always made to be a happy resolved case. I chose it because I also I wrote a gothic creature feature set in Alaska, and I think that's why it appealed to me. So thank you, Brad. That is my review. Ciao.
Hi, I'm Jenny Kiefer. I'm a horror author and owner of a horror bookstore in Louisville, Kentucky called Butcher Cabin Books. My debut novel will be out with Quirk Books in January 2024 called This Wretched Valley. And I am going to talk about the book Bunny by Mona Awad. It's one of my absolute favorite books ever, and it's kind of horror adjacent, but I would say that it has a little bit for everyone. It's got things for people who like cult books. It's got things for people who like sort of magical realism or sort of that touch of weird or surrealism. And best of all, it makes fun of MFA programs, which is originally what drew me to it. I have a background where I've studied creative writing pedagogy, and in that process I've sort of learned that, at least for me, the MFA program is not something that I'm very interested in. I think that a lot of times it costs a lot of money, and now with, Discord and the internet, you can find that type of community and that type of you can sort of create your own program and make friendships and learn a lot more along the way. And so that's what originally drew me to the book Bunny, was that it was sort of poking fun at MFA programs. And I read it in a book club, and it was just crazy and wild and amazing. And I would recommend everyone go out and read it. I think you will have a lot of fun with it. It's hard to sort of describe the plot without sort of giving away spoilers, but it's basically about this girl who's in an MFA program, and her cohort is, her very small cohort is made up of this clique of 4 other girls, and she's not, at the beginning of the story, is not part of that clique. And each of the 4 girls has kind of like this quirky personality, and they're all like very specific. Like one's really vintage and one's really cutesy. Think of like different eras of Taylor Swift, and they all kind of write that, sort of like stereotypical MFA fare of like overly purple prose, or like, I think one of them writes poems on like slate tablets, and it's just like really goofy and fun. And then there's just like this darker sort of side to it that comes in later in the book. So yeah, I would definitely recommend everyone to read that.
Hey everyone, Rain here. Brad has invited me on to talk about one of my favorite horror books in celebration of Halloween. And I've decided to go with Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. I've read a number of Buehlman's books, and although they've all been great, this one is top of the mountain for me. I read it back in January, I believe, and it became an instant all-time favorite of mine. As the book says on the cover, this is an epic tale of medieval horror, and if that doesn't at least pique your interest, I don't know what to tell you. It takes the bleak atmosphere of the Black Plague era and blends it perfectly with some of the best monster horror I've ever read. The creature designs and descriptions are simply astounding. The book is also largely episodic, so each chapter feels self-contained and fulfilling. It also has an interesting history that is pretty inspiring. Originally, the book didn't do well commercially, but has since been reborn and has found new success in the horror world. Also, it has 3 of the best characters I've read in recent memory. They're all easy to root for. If any of this sounds appealing to you, don't hesitate to check it out. Again, that is Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. Happy Halloween, everyone. Brad, thank you for having me on.
Hey, Brad. Thanks a lot for inviting me to come and talk. And going to talk about a book with you called Strange Angels by Kathy Koch. Oh, and I'm Joe Koch, author of The Wingspan of Severed Hands, The Cuvade, and Convulsive. So that's me. Anyway, much more interesting than that. Kathy Koch is the author of Cipher. That's probably her most famous work. So in Strange Angels, she's again looking at the art world and the questions that creative people deal with in terms of dark, emotional, psychological spaces. What is the difference between madness and enlightenment? Where does creativity come from? And what will you ultimately do to make art? Like, what price would you pay for that kind of thing? So she does this through a very intense relationship between two men. The narrator is Grant, and he is a failed artist. He finds some drawings by one of his girlfriend's clients because she's like an art therapist. And Grant becomes just completely fascinated with the drawings that this man has done, goes behind his girlfriend's back to figure out who the guy is, and becomes immediately involved in just this totally over-involved, twisted relationship. And Kathy Koch has such a writing style where she can capture dark and light together in the same moment. And I just think that's super powerful. Her writing moves really fast. The word choices are poetic, emotional, driven, and I'm definitely a huge fan of her work. So this book goes to some pretty exciting, emotional places, but also very painful places, because it does not pretend that mental illness doesn't exist. It doesn't pretend that the tortured artist is a good thing. And in a way different from Cypher, it's both much more realistic and much more fantastical. And I really thought it was something special. So that's my Halloween recommendation for you. Strange Angels by Kathy Koch. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Hey everybody, I'm Tim McGregor. I'm the author of Heart Strange and Dreadful and Lure, out now from Tenebris Press. And I came here to recommend a book, and that book is Immortelle by Catherine McCarthy. It's out from Off Limits Press, came out in 2021. It is a beautifully written tale of grief, loss, and revenge with a hint of the supernatural. Catherine excels at writing creepy but very subtle horror, and horror that has a bit of a heart to it. I can't recommend it enough. It was one of my favorite books of 2021, or one of my favorite books, period, actually. It's a novella, so it's a very quick read. And I've gotten to know Catherine pretty well, and I've had the good fortune of reading some books some of her other work, stuff that is coming out next year. And it is outstanding. So McCarthy's an author to watch, but if you want to dip your toe in something short, quick, and really well written, I would recommend Immortelle. It's a really good book. All right. Thanks, Brad, for having me on. Appreciate it, man. See you later.
Hey everyone, I'm Bram Stoker and Elgin Award nominated author Jessica McHugh, and I'm here to give you one of my favorite horror book recommendations. Are you ready to return some videotapes? It's American Psycho! That's right. My recommendation is American Psycho by incomparably brilliant writer and tremendous asshole Bret Easton Ellis. What is? To be honest, I'd love to recommend Lunar Park as a Bret Easton Ellis book, but if you haven't read a lot of his past catalog, it doesn't hit as hard. So if you haven't read American Psycho, this is a good place to start. A lot of you have probably seen the movie American Psycho, and just so you know, if you think that's rough, woo, the book is a whole lot rougher. For me, American Psycho is one of the most horrifying, hilarious, erotic, shameful, and revolting books ever written, and I love it so much. I think a lot of people are familiar with the story of American Psycho and the character Patrick Bateman, but I really feel like the book does a better job than, say, the movie at characterizing him. The movie kind of comes out swinging, showing that Patrick Bateman has a lot of issues, like right from the get-go. And in the book, we get that sense too. I mean, his obsession with music and fashion, especially his obsession with himself, I feel like is taken a lot slower in the book. So it really builds up this persona of Patrick Bateman as so much more than just your usual asshole yuppie in the 80s. The sections of him discussing Whitney Houston at length are some of the funniest scenes in a book that has breast electrocution that I've ever read. But breast melting and starving rats up the hoo-ha doesn't start out that way. Actually, kind of starts out a little sexy with the girl scenes, and I mean, filthy for sure. But kind of, you're like, all right, I'm into what Patrick Bateman is doing here. And then you get a couple chapters, you're like, no, sir, I would like to leave the building. This kind of ultra violence contrasted with these huge scenes of him discussing fashion and music so beautifully, and like it's something he really, really cares about, and then he'll just rip a woman apart with no care at all. I mean, it's really quite amazing. And don't even get me started on that zoo scene. Woo! Despite being the only book that's ever made me vomit, I highly recommend American Psycho and Luna Park.
Hello, my name is Robert P. Ottone, and I'm the author of some spooky stuff. So Brad asked me if I wanted to participate in this really cool idea of, horror authors recommending horror novels, and I said yes, and he said, well, I'm going to tell you what I want you to recommend, because I've been on him to read this for a long time. And I'm in Yankee Cap, inaugural season, Yankee Stadium, 2009 shirt. I saw Obama throw out the first pitch. And so, very New York book today. Probably the ultimate New York book. The Fisherman by John Langan. John is easily one of my favorite authors, if not my favorite author of all time. He has been exceedingly kind to me, and he is somebody that I look up to a great deal. And The Fisherman is a book that I read annually, and I get something new out of it every time. And, people talk about the horror of place, like setting and stuff like that, and nobody does that better than Langan in The Fisherman. A lot of people, they think New York, they think the city, they think Manhattan, cabs bustling, all of that stuff, concrete. But really, New York to me is upstate New York. I live on Long Island. I'm moving upstate New York, and that's the real New York to me in a lot of ways. And Langan captures that horror of place beautifully. There's a lot of mystery up there. There's a lot of history up there too. But also, more importantly, John's book deals with grief, and where we go from grief. I read the book after my dad passed away, and I didn't process it for a little while. And then I read it again, and I read it again. And the most recent time I read it, I got very emotional, and it really hit me exceedingly hard, a few years removed from my dad's passing. And I realize it's, grief is weird. I talk about it with my therapist, and we talk about how things don't really ever get better, but things get different. And for Abe and Dan in The Fisherman, things certainly get different in dealing with their own grief. So you have sort of this beautiful narrative about grief and suffering and how grief changes you, but then you also have this beautiful sense of place, and arguably the best horror novel in 30 to 40 years. So I recommend The Fisherman by Mr. John Langan.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Roland. I'm a horror author and editor, and I'm here to talk about Little Lugosi by Douglas Ford. Now, this was put out by Madness Heart Press. It's a novella, right? It's not too long. However, a lot of stuff going on in this book. Our main character's name is Trevor. He works as a landscaper for a local college. His wife's name is Madeline. She is some sort of medical assistant. Madeline decides they're going to get a pet, but they're not going to get a cat or a dog. Trevor comes home one day and there's a box. They open up the box and Madeline presents their new pet, a leech. So they name it Little Lugosi, wink wink. And of course they have to feed it, which is creepy on its own. A lot of blood. On a sort of a side plot, there is this menace on the campus where Trevor works. So the menace is because the campus is sort of surrounded by these woods, wild boar will sometimes come onto the campus. There is one boar in particular. He is sort of legendary, and he is this enormous wild boar, and Mac puts it into his head that he is going to track and kill the minister, get rid of him for good. And he recruits Trevor to kind of help him with that, as well as a former college professor who seems to have a lot of weird, trivial knowledge about this boar. It kind of starts off like weird horror, almost as if Ford is sort of sneaking up on us. All of a sudden, this becomes a transgressive horror, and it even kind of tumbles a little bit into bizarro horror. I really can't compare it to anything else I've read over the last few years because it's very, very different. So this has everything, though. If you're a horror fan, it's going to have a little bit of everything. It has some body horror. It has some sticky gore. It has some cult creepiness that I'm not even going to give you a hint at. You really have to see that for yourself. So my recommendation for 2022, if you haven't picked this up, pick up Douglas Ford's Little Lugosi. Again, it's from Madness Heart Press. And that's my recommendation, Brad.
Hey everybody, I'm William Sterling. I want to take just a minute to recommend this book, Jonathan Jan's and The Dark Game. What I really loved about this book is it works on so many different levels. I'm a big Jonathan Jan's fan in general. Everything that he writes has this element of familiarity about it, but he puts new spins on all the genres, like The Siren and the Spectre. We've got a pretty standard haunted house story, but with twists. I think The Dark Game is the book that I've read of his that really takes that idea of giving us something familiar in a new package and really elevates it to a whole new level. At its face, this is a story about 10 writers that get brought out on a writer's retreat. It is kind of a writer's retreat and a competition all at once, because whatever writer wins this competition with the esteemed, famous writer of the book, they're going to get a publishing deal, they get an advance on their royalties. It's everything that little indie authors like myself kind of dream about. Blended together with all the fun of a convention, coming together with other writers, getting inspired by them. I think Jonathan Jan's does a really great job of harnessing all of the awe and all of the energy associated with those sorts of events. But then, while all these writers are together trying to craft out these stories, people start dropping like flies. It's a very Agatha Christie and then there were none sort of a setup where people start dying. We're not really sure, but as the numbers are dwindling, we're trying to figure out exactly what's going on and who's killing them. And I'm going to kind of stop my preview of the book there, because if I go any farther, I dive into spoilers. But suffice it to say that the way he blows this world open in the second half, and the way that Jonathan Jan's really gets ambitious with his own stories, is really impressive on a scale that you don't see necessarily until authors are into their, like, deep into their catalog, and they're willing to take some bigger risks. So if you've read a Jan's book before, if you like Jonathan Jan's, or if you're just trying to find somebody new, I think this works really well on its own, The Dark Game, and also the potential with this book, just in general, with everything Jan's writes. That'll make so much more sense once you read it. But it's really impressive, and I love him for it. So again, Jonathan Jan's The Dark Game, highly, highly, highly recommend. It's a lot of fun.